Holocaust. Holocaust. The Holocaust was the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews and 5 million other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. The Nazis believed that Germans were racially superior and that the Jews, deemed inferior, were an alien threat to the German racial community. As a result, the Nazis felt justified, even required to carry out this genocide. One of the major turning points in the Holocaust was the 1942 Wannsee Conference, where ideas of how to deal with the Jewish problem were discussed. It was during this conference that the term final solution was introduced, and also the decision was made as to how the Nazis would transition from mass murder to systematic genocide. During the Holocaust, German authorities targeted other groups because of their perceived racial inferiority, including Gypsies and people of Slavic descent. Other groups were persecuted as part of the Nazi crusade to purify Germany. The Nazis killed communists and socialists for political reasons, homosexuals for moral reasons, and the mentally and/or physically disabled whom the Nazis viewed as drains on society. In 1933, the Jewish population of Europe stood at over 9 million people. Most of these European Jews lived in countries that would come under the control of Nazi Germany. By 1945, the Nazis, under the direction of Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, killed nearly 2 out of every 3 European Jews as part of the final solution, the Nazi policy for the extermination of the Jewish people. 1. Prior to 1938, Nazi policies towards Jews has been building in harshness, but as yet were primarily nonviolent. That changed on November 9th and 10th in an incident known as Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, in which Nazis in Germany torched synagogues, vandalized Jewish homes, schools, and businesses, and killed at least 100 Jews. In the aftermath, nearly 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to Nazi concentration camps, which began the mass deportation of Jews to the camps in German-occupied Europe. After Kristallnacht, conditions for German Jews grew increasingly worse with the beginning of the final solution. In the early years of the Nazi regime, the National Socialist government established concentration camps to detain political and ideological opponents. Increasingly in the years before the outbreak of war, SS and police officials imprisoned Jews and other victims of ethnic and racial hatred in the camps. To concentrate and monitor the Jewish population as well as to facilitate later deportation, the Nazis created ghettos and forced labor camps where Nazis could exploit both Jewish and non-Jewish workers. Death camps, or extermination camps that housed gassing facilities and crematories allowed for mass executions of these undesirables to take place. At many of these camps, Nazi doctors performed unimaginable human experiments. Nazis persecuted and murdered millions of other people too. Between 2 and 3 million Soviet prisoners of war were murdered or died of starvation, disease, neglect, or maltreatment. The Germans deported millions of Polish and Soviet civilians for forced labor in Germany or in occupied Poland, where they worked and often died under terrible conditions. In the final months of the war, SS guards moved camp inmates by train or death marches, in an attempt to prevent the Allied liberation of large numbers of prisoners. As Allied forces moved across Europe in a series of offensives against Germany, they began to encounter and liberate concentration camp prisoners, as well as prisoners en route from one camp to another. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, many of the survivors found shelter in displaced persons, DP, camps administered by the Allied powers. Between 1948 and 1951, almost 700,000 Jews emigrated to Israel, which had been established by the newly created United Nations as a homeland for Jewish people. Other Jewish displaced persons emigrated to the United States and other nations. The last DP camp closed in 1957. The crimes committed during the Holocaust devastated most European Jewish communities and eliminated hundreds of Jewish communities in occupied Eastern Europe entirely.